Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US and Israel have now called their teams back from the talks that were ongoing regarding Gaza with Hamas. Both have blamed Hamas for the latest move. This comes as conditions in Gaza are deteriorating and people are dying of hunger, according to media reports. A US aid analysis found no evidence of massive or systematic theft of US-funded aid by Hamas in Gaza, challenging claims made from Israel and the US. Meanwhile, Médecins Sans Frontières says that 25% of young children and pregnant or breastfeeding women screened at its Gaza clinics last week were malnourished. The medical charity accused Israel of a policy of starvation, adding that severe malnutrition in children under 5 has tripled in just 2 weeks in the Gaza Strip. France's highest court will rule today whether to uphold an arrest warrant for Syria's former president Bashar al-Assad in connection with the 2013 chemical weapons attack. The case marks a rare attempt to hold a former head of state accountable for alleged war crimes. Thai military continues the clash with Cambodian troops along the border, now marking a second straight day of escalating tensions. Meanwhile, US and ASEAN allies have now called for a ceasefire between them. Reports show that Iran and the E3, which includes Germany, Britain, and France, have now resumed their talks. They are in Istanbul today to discuss and resume the nuclear talks, amid warnings by UN of snapback sanctions on Iran. Islamist leaders in Sudan, including the former ruling party chief Ahmed Haroun, are backing the military in hopes of a post-war political comeback. Haroun, wanted by the ICC, now hiding, has told Reuters that Sudan should embrace a model that keeps the army in politics, while a leaked document details Islamist military move involvement. A magnitude 6.6 earthquake struck off the southwestern coast of Samoa earlier today. According to the United States Geological Survey, the U.S. Tsunami Warning Center confirmed that there is no tsunami threat despite the quake's strength. Iran has begun talks with European powers in Istanbul amid rising tensions over its nuclear program. The Foreign Ministry says the meeting with Germany, France, and Britain, known as the E3, is a test of realism for Europe and an opportunity for the West to correct its position on Tehran's nuclear rights. Iran has firmly rejected any discussion on extending UN Security Council Resolution 2231, calling such talks meaningless and baseless. Ahead of the talks, Iran reasserted its right to enrich uranium, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declaring that Iran's nuclear stance remains unchanged, even after the region's recent war. He said Iran will not relinquish its enrichment rights under any pressure. Now we're joined by Peter Baum for this discussion. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz, joining us live from London. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, given
Good to see you.
Now, given the tensions in the region, what role do the European powers, particularly Germany and France and Britain, play in this stability?
I think this initiative is really coming from the Iranian side and not the European side. The Trump administration has virtually wiped its hands off from the nuclear talks with Iran. I think Trump only yesterday, perhaps the day before, stated in front of the media that if Iran want to talk to us, they can. We're not going to pressure them, and we're certainly not going to force them to the table. So I think the Trump administration have come to a political decision that the talks with Iran aren't going to go anywhere, they're meaningless. And so what is Iran left to do? It can only go to Europe for some kind of comfort factor to reinstitute something that they don't want reinstituted. They're not going to give up their ability to source uranium, that we know. Trump has said if they do, the door is open for another military attack on Iran. So really, the Iranians are left between the devil and the deep blue sea. There is absolutely nothing left for them to do other than to go to the European Union and the three major countries within Europe for some kind of factor. And it's interesting that the UK are going to be part of this discussion. And don't forget, Trump is meeting with Starmer over the next few days. So whatever feedback the UK get from these discussions with Iran will be fed back to Donald Trump anyway. I think the talks, as far as the Iranians concerned, are probably a decent publicity stunt, but I don't think they're going to be very meaningful, and there's nothing the Europeans nor anyone else can do to stop the Iranians from continuing with their enrichment plans other than military action.
Yes, Peter, I wanted to come to you for this. How might Iran's firm stance on its right to enrich uranium influence this current negotiation as well as future negotiations?
Well, when it comes to future negotiations, Iran is in a very difficult position for three main reasons. The first one is, and I'm surprised this hasn't been given more global media coverage, and that's because had it have done, the global media would have had to admit to their errors in reporting. Very, very recently, over the last 48 hours, the Iranian foreign minister and other senior cabinet ministers have been giving interviews on Iranian TV, and indeed one to Al Jazeera, actually admitting that the damage done to their nuclear facilities was far greater than they had purported during the Israeli military strikes. That's the first thing. The second thing is there is mounting opposition within Iran still to the regime. And the third, and probably the most important factor, is that Iran is currently going through a period of severe heat and drought. The infrastructure isn't working. The country has come to a standstill because of temperatures getting up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's a lack of water. Iran is under severe domestic and internal pressure, and I think these talks with Europe are possibly just a way of deflecting from those internal pressures and continuing the rhetoric of uranium enrichment. We will not be told what to do. I don't think the Iranian bark, I think the Iranian bark is a lot harsher than its bite. I think Iran is in a very difficult predicament, and their ability to undertake what they want to undertake is severely limited, probably beyond repair for the next several years. And don't forget how many nuclear scientists they lost during the 12-day war with Israel.
Yes.
I don't think Iran can actually achieve the objectives that she says she wants to achieve and will achieve going forward.
Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we'll come back to you for our discussion. Now, a new report by Doctors Without Borders warns that 1 in 4 young children and pregnant or breastfeeding women screened in Gaza last week were malnourished. The medical group blames Israel's policy for starvation for what it calls a triple surge in severe child malnutrition in just 2 weeks. This comes as a U.S. government analysis found no evidence that Hamas systematically delivered or diverted U.S.-funded humanitarian aid, contradicting claims made by Israel and some U.S. officials. The report reviewed 156 incidents of aid loss or theft, finding that nearly a third were caused directly or indirectly by Israeli military action. The findings have intensified the debate over the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where the UN says nearly a quarter of the population now faces famine-like conditions. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz. Now, what's your reaction, Peter, for this news and criticism towards Israel?
Regarding which, from Médecins Sans Frontières or from the USAID organization?
From the Frontier, MSF Frontier's claims.
Okay,
yes.
It's quite interesting. If true, of course, it's another disaster for Israel in their attempts to bring in aid to the Gazans. But I think it should be challenged somewhat, because Médecins Sans Frontières actually stated some time ago that they were no functioning hospitals within Gaza within which they could operate. Now, all of a sudden, they're back functioning in field hospitals in Gaza. So I think there's a bit of a lack of credibility on behalf of that particular organisation. First of all, they're suggesting they couldn't function because of the Israeli bombardment, which has continued. And now, a couple of months later, they seem to be functioning again. So I think the story here is to question that particular organisation. That aside, clearly there is an issue with delivering aid into Gaza, which are affecting the ordinary Gazans. Now, the Israelis are aware of this, as are the UN aid agencies, and we, with our own eyes, see hundreds of trucks on the Gazan border which aren't finding their way into Gaza. Now, why? And is it the fault of the Israelis? Is it the fault of the UN agencies who want to take control of the aid distribution and dilute the efforts of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is currently taking control? So, going back to your question, we will continue to see demonisation of the Jewish state of Israel day after day after day from certain bad faith actors. I include in that at the moment MSF, because it beggars belief that some months ago they were actually stating to the world it was impossible for them to function, and now, a couple of months later, they seem to be functioning. So whether they were lying then or lying now, but they were certainly lying in one of the two cases, we have yet to see. Now, in terms of the report that's just come out, and I understand it's come out from a subdivision of USAID called the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Now, all of us following the work of the UN aid agencies will know that USAID was one of the first agencies that the Trump administration cut all funding to. And this goes back, I think, to the discussion that I had on your program yesterday about ruining the business model of these aid agencies, and USAID has been one of them. And I've read the report in its entirety, and it really does beg a belief. It's already been debunked by the State Department and the Israeli authorities, and the analysis it highlights is 156 cases of stolen aid, of which over half were attributed to unidentified sources, unarmed factions, people they don't know. Not once is Hamas mentioned, and yet we saw video clips, numerous of them, of Hamas operatives stealing aid. We've seen reports and video clips of Gazans themselves protesting against Hamas for stealing aid, And only today we've seen video clips which have gone viral of Hamas operatives gouging themselves on food within their bunkers, whereas they're living like kings in restaurants. It's absurd. I think this report lacks any type of credibility. Very surprised that it's been given the kind of publicity that it has been.
Yes. Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us as always and sharing your insight all the way from London. Now we move on to our next news. Tensions continue to rise over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, with world leaders speaking out in strong terms. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the crisis has gone beyond the world's worst fears. He's urging Israel to meet its obligations under international law and take immediate steps to protect innocent lives and end starvation. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney also condemned Israel's control over aid, calling it a violation of international law. He says blocked Canadian-funded aid must be released and delivered by international agencies. This comes as French President Emmanuel Macron says France will recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in upcoming September. Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes. He's anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, thank you for joining. What more can you tell us about this situation?
Two more nations speaking out about the situation in Gaza. We have, of course, seen in recent days further support from international actors talking about the significance of the situation in Gaza for civilians. Of course, pushing for an end to the war, but also looking at this situation surrounding aid. Peter detailing some of the points that Israel are clearly looking at, but international actors as well saying that this situation is untenable given the amount of life that is being lost around these aid centres, reported of course within Gaza, but also the amount of civilian casualties that are still happening within the enclave. That also, just to allude, is brought to us by the Gaza administration and Gaza health authorities, because there is no independent reporting in Gaza at the moment because of restrictions on reporters from Israel around the enclave. But it's interesting to see this shift that we are having from some world leaders. Of course, the initial horrific attack that was carried out by Hamas on October the 7th has now seen a conflict over 20 months long with a short ceasefire in the middle, but civilian casualty and displacement that could be in the tens of thousands for deaths, potentially up to 60,000, and also millions of people displaced across the Gaza Strip. Questions being raised continually about the situation on the ground, questions being raised to Israel about how they can limit civilian casualties. Of course, it's a difficult point. Israel say that in this situation, Hamas are hiding amongst the civilians, and it's difficult to determine who is a civilian and who is a member of Hamas. So for Israel, they're almost treating it as we've got to be careful about who we are letting get this aid, of course, who could be hiding amongst civilians. That is a verified claim by many sources, but of course the civilian casualties are outweighing potentially that incident. It is a complicated situation, it's division on both sides, but more outcries from people across the world leaders and groups, including the UN, looking at the situation. Diplomacy will be key. Conversations in Qatar have been ongoing in Doha, but it seems that they have stalled for now. US intervention looks like it could be waning as well, but diplomacy is the only way out of this conflict.
Thank you, Joshua, for sharing that. Now we move on to our next news. Ukraine will require over $40 billion in external support in 2026 to sustain its economy and war effort. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal confirmed Kyiv is working to secure long-term financing ahead of the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. President Zelensky also revealed that Ukraine has funds for 3 Patriot missile defense systems, but is seeking additional financial support to secure another 7, relying on partners for the rest of the funding. Shmyhal disclosed that Ukraine's 2025 defense budget has been increased by nearly $10 billion to $50 billion, or 26% of GDP, with $16.4 billion earmarked for weapons procurement. Despite projected revenues of $48.5 billion, Ukraine has already secured $22 billion in foreign financing. Additionally, Zelensky is negotiating a deal with the U.S. to exchange battlefield-tested Ukrainian drones for American weapons. Ukraine has also proposed a peace summit with Russia by the end of August, focusing on an unconditional ceasefire and humanitarian issues, particularly prisoner swaps for children. The financial and military challenges continue as Ukraine seeks to maintain its defense and secure more finances. Now we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo, Japan. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, what are the key challenges that Ukraine faces in securing the budget of 40 billion or over in external support for 2026?
Currently, the front line, Russia and Ukraine front line is not moving so much. And in this case, this is a war of the attrition, and we cannot see it when it will end. Under such kind of situation, the quantity is a matter of concern. Quantity of weapons and quantity of the budget, but these are very important. In this case, currently, the President Trump demand the other alliance partner, including Ukraine, the value as an ally for the United States. So in this case, what kind of things Ukraine can provide the U.S. Instead of the U.S. support? In this case, firstly, he focusing on rare earths. Now he focusing on the military technology. And instead of this, Ukraine need to get the support from the United States, which is a quantity of weapons. Especially drone is the matter. And of course, variety of the products you need, including Patriot missiles or the civil purpose products to support the military operation. So that's why in total, they need the budget too. So President Zelensky of Ukraine asked the United States support and asked the European partners the budgetary support or weapons. So that is needed to maintain the front line. But that is the situation Ukraine is facing.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Satoru. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next news. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has approved a new bill to restore the independence of the country's anti-corruption agencies after nationwide protests. The protests erupted following a law that placed key watchdogs under presidential control, raising concerns over political interference. The protests, the largest since Russia's invasion, had questioned Kyiv's commitment to reforms amid its EU bid. Zelensky acknowledged the public backlash, said the new bill, which will soon be submitted to parliament, ensures the agency's autonomy while strengthening Ukraine's law enforcement. He emphasized the need for unity and respect for the will of Ukrainian people. The legislation is seen as a reversal of earlier measures that allowed a Zelensky-appointed prosecutor to control the agencies, triggering criticism that it threatened their independence. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Satoru Nagao. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us. Now, China's foreign ministry has issued a decisive stance Sorry, let me go back to my question. So how does this anti-corruption, this bill that has passed by Ukraine, why does this, wait.
Yeah, anti-corruption issue in Ukraine is very important because when Ukraine asks the EU to include them as a member of the EU, in this case, the EU pointed out corruption in Ukraine is a matter of concern. So that's why the Ukraine need to prove the level of their policy to tackle the corruption. So that's why this is very important. So originally this is important, but now Russia's aggression has started, and so joining the EU or if EU understand Ukraine as a partner of them, in this case it is more easier for Ukraine to get support from Europe. So that's why this is more serious, very important issue for Ukraine.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now we move on to our next news. China's foreign ministry issued a decisive stance addressing the European Union's approach to Russia-related sanctions, high-tech export restrictions, and trade rhetoric. Officials emphasized a stern stance towards the EU sanctions tied to Russia, warning against unilateral measures perceived as politically motivated. Meanwhile, Beijing rejected the EU's overcapacity argument, calling it a misguided and protectionist view that distorts the relationship between supply and demand. On trade with China, officials argued the EU to ease restrictions on high-tech exports, arguing that barriers are harming constructive economic engagement. At the same time, China announced its willingness to import more high-quality European goods, extending an olive branch to European producers while reaffirming its position on fair and open trade policies. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo, Japan. Now, how do China's arguments against EU's overcapacity view reflect its broader approach to global trade and supply-demand dynamics, according to you?
China thinks the EU's policy is ally of the United States policy. So that's why the escalating the current US-China competition. China thinks the EU is imposing sanctions because they are ally of the United States. So, but what happened is, of course, there are two aspects. One is business related, another one is security aspect. Security aspect, yes, China is right. EU or European countries are ally of the United States, and they do not want to sell the high-tech machine to China because China will exploit such kind of the business chance for the military purpose. So that's why this is not comfortable. But at the same time, business-related issues also exist because when many countries export China the high-tech machine, China copies this one and makes a new one as a made in China and export other country. That is not comfortable. So that's why if China has already did such kind of things, so that is a violation of the promise between two. So that's why this is not good. So both the security aspect and the business aspect, EU-China trade has a problem. But recently, when the Chinese Foreign Minister this month indeed visited Europe, his remark was a very big problem because he clearly said, if the war continues in Europe, US cannot concentrate the policy against China. This means that China won't want Russia to continue the invading Ukraine. This is not a comfortable remark for Europe. And so this remark or this way of thinking itself creating the problem between Europe and China now. But that is reality indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru, for joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now let's have a look at some stories from the world of business. SpaceX's Starlink suffered a rare but major international outrage, disrupting service for tens of thousands of users across the US and Europe. The downtime lasted approximately 2.5 hours and was caused by the failure of key internal software services. Starlink VP Michael Nichols and CEO Elon Musk apologized, with Musk assuring users that the root cause would be addressed to prevent future incidents. The satellite internet provider, which serves over 6 million users in 140-plus countries, has since restored its service. Volkswagen has revised its 2025 profit forecast downward, citing the impact of U.S. tariffs under President Trump's trade policies. The The German automaker now expects an operating return on sales of 4 to 5% compared to its earlier projection of 5.5 to 6.5%. Full-year sales are also expected to remain flat, scrapping earlier hopes of up to 5% growth. The company and its peers are pressing EU trade negotiators to strike a trade deal and remove the 25% tariff on European car imports that has been in place since April. Demand in China is rising for repair services of advanced NVIDIA AI chips. Despite US export bans to China, around a dozen boutique firms in Shenzhen specialize in fixing NVIDIA's H100 GPUs, which have somehow entered the market, along with A100 GPUs and other chipsets. These repair businesses are thriving by servicing high-tech components officially restricted from the export. Intel has announced it will end the year with more than 20% fewer employees compared to last year, part of new CEO Lip Bu-tan's plan to streamline the company. Since taking charge in March, Tan has focused on cost discipline, layoffs, and selling off businesses to reshape Intel into a more efficient chip maker. The company aims to avoid excessive spending and improve its financial health moving forward. Europe's smaller firms are gaining favor with investors seeking protection from tariffs and a stronger euro. Their domestic focus shields from cross-border levies and currency volatility, with cheaper credit and potential fiscal stimulus boosting confidence. These companies offer a buffer against global trade tensions while benefiting from improving local economic conditions. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.